with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. In case you don't know, Cross Question is now 3 nights a week, Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday at 8 o'clock. We have a panel of 4 politicians, commentators, historians, academics, economists, who knows, joining us each night to take your questions. The number to call tonight, 0345 6060 973. And if you're listening as opposed to watching and you have never watched before, give us a try on Global Player or the LBC YouTube channel, website or Facebook or Twitter feed. Joining me on the show tonight, we have the broadcaster and author Paul Mason with us. We have the political commentator and host of the Reason podcast, Darren Grimes, the former Labour MP for Don Valley, former Cabinet Minister Caroline Flint. She also sometimes co-hosts the For the Many podcast with me. And also we have Chris Green, who is the Conservative MP for Bolton West. So time to go to your questions, 0345 6060 973.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
And our first questioner is Phil in Croydon. Hi, Phil. What would you like to ask the panel?
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel. Given in the light that there was 0 deaths reported for the first time in ages yesterday, and hospital numbers are dropping all the time, do you think there's a need to actually postpone the unlocking on the 21st of June 2021?
Chris Green, let me come to you first, purely on the basis that you are an MP for Bolton, which we know has had more of the Indian or Delta cases, as I'm told we must now call it. What's been your experience? Phil said there that hospitalisations have been declining every day. I'm not sure that's the case anymore, particularly in your area.
Locally in Bolton, there has been a slight increase in people admitted to hospital. But I think the key point is the target of the government with the vaccination programme is to disconnect the transmission of the disease from hospitalisation and death. And with 0 people having died today in the United Kingdom, 0 people having died yesterday in England, there's a very strong indication that that transmission to hospitalisation, death, that's been broken. And I think many people now are looking for a return to normality. And this isn't just about going for a pint in the pub, although that is a welcome thing. It's also about that 5 million people waiting to have normal hospital treatment. That's a huge backlog. It's actually should be larger because of the number of people who haven't been to see their GP who would have been added to those lists.
So at the moment, you would be firmly of the view that June the 21st should go ahead as planned?
Yeah, absolutely. 21st of June, I think for so many people is what they're focused on, what they're looking forward to. I think it'll symbolise a real break from what we've been through. I think that the people have been amazingly resilient, amazingly focused and responsible in what they've been doing. And I think if we push it back yet again because of Delta, Epsilon, whatever comes down the line after that, if we keep pushing it back, people will lose the trust. There's already a little trust in politicians, but we don't want the people to lose the trust in the experts and the scientists.
Caroline Flint, where do you stand on this?
Well, I really do hope that we are able to move forward on the 21st of June. And I mean, it's great news today. And I think it's, that combination of vaccinations. I'm a vaccination centre volunteer myself, but also treatments as well. Let's not forget, I mean, some of the things that are done now, a cheap steroid apparently has been incredibly important in terms of preventing people getting worse when they've got COVID. But I would say, Ian, and I was interested in listening to what's happening in Scotland today as well, is that we have to look at the data. And if there is a case that, there are parts of England that there are rising cases and it's not as optimistic as elsewhere, we might have to look at something which is a more tiered approach, which is what they're doing in Scotland at the moment. I think Glasgow restrictions are being lifted, but I think there are 13 other areas in Scotland where they're still continuing with some restrictions there. But I mean, look, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we're heading in the right direction here, but I don't want the last year to be wasted if we go too soon again, because we've been through that performance before.
The Prime Minister constantly says we have to be driven by the data, not by dates. Do you think that there is a risk that by June the 14th, when they're apparently going to announce the decision, that we won't actually have enough data to make the decision? Because we all know there is a sort of 2 to 3 week time lag between contracting the virus and then it becoming very serious. Will we have all that data by then? Would that not be a case for maybe delaying for a couple of weeks?
If that's to me, and I mean, I don't think
it is.
we should be driven by the evidence and the data. But as you quite rightly pointed out, there is a lag in the data. And the other bit of data we need to be conscious of is the number of people who are now getting the vaccinations. You know, the 30s are getting it now for the first time. I'm getting my second vaccination next Thursday, the 10th of June is my day. So there's other factors in this as well, Iain, I think that's at play that we have to make a decision. So but you can't, there is a point at which, we're not going to have a completely clear picture on this. We might be looking at boosters in the autumn as well that's going to be necessary, just like flu vaccinations. So you have to be guided by the data. You can't let it completely paralyse you. And there's lots of different types of data to take into account. I hope it's not the case. That the Prime Minister's got his wedding under the wire because we've got bad news coming in a fortnight's time. I hope that isn't the case. But look, we're making progress, and that's really good news.
I think if that was the case, it would have been a big announcement and cameras and everything, rather than doing it rather covertly. Darren Grimes, you've been fairly outspoken about lifting lockdown in the past. Clearly, I'm presuming that you can't see any reason for it not to be lifted, or do you think that there is a possibility that we don't have all the data yet?
Well, no, I mean, I was listening to what Nicola Sturgeon said in your news item there, where she said that actually, and I quote, level 2 is not lockdown, where she's talking about the fact that actually for most businesses, they're open. But that doesn't take into consideration, Iain, the fact that for many of these businesses, they're operating at a loss, right? They're having to turn around to staff members, if they haven't already, and tell them that they can't afford to keep them on. So it might be level 2, but it is still lockdown for many businesses, which have been propelled into some of the worst financial and mental misery that we've seen in this country for over a decade since the last recession. So you're right. I am someone who believes that actually we've got to get out of this as soon as possible. But I'm not really interested in the numbers of infections, right? The numbers I'm interested in are those of hospitalizations and deaths. And I do think actually the media class have a real responsibility right now to not cruelly propel people up and down the country out of the hope that we've built up over all of this last year, let's not forget, which many people are absolutely desperate for. And I think talk of a third wave and delaying a return of our freedom are way off the mark, Iain, way off the mark.
Paul Mason, interested to hear what you think about this, because I can imagine that there is part of you that fears lockdown ending too much, but at some point politicians have got to make the decision. And given, I said earlier in the programme, that 450 people are dying every day from cancer, which I know is not a transmissible disease, but flu, 55 people on average die every day of flu. And at some point, politicians and we as in the society have got to come to a conclusion as to what an acceptable level of deaths are.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that we're no longer in that situation where we had people a year ago saying it's either we save people or we save the economy. I think this was the fallacy that drove a lot of the anti-lockdown sentiment, particularly in the Conservative Party. I welcome the fact that, albeit with a bit of pushing and shoving, the Prime Minister came to the view last October that the best way of saving the economy is to lock down until you've beaten this thing. We've now got the vaccine, which is brilliant. So the vaccine is compressing the space in which the virus can spread. The India/Delta version came to this country, one assumes, through people travelling through airports. Why did we allow that? But we've got it. And all I want to do is follow the science. No, the science is never 100% certain. It's always disputed. But you could probably, the question we're really asking is there a danger of a big takeoff of this Delta variant to the extent that we get another repeat of last September, where you've got everybody's celebrating, saying, wow, amazing, we're all out there. I've been out there, on the beach, outside the pub, fantastic. Can't wait to do more of it. While we're all celebrating, quietly the disease is having another go. So it's the prudential principle which the Prime Minister was right to adopt. He's right to adopt it right the way through to the 14th and 21st. And I think we should just say, as long as the evidence is clearly presented and transparent, we live with what it is. I mean, the maximum any of the experts are talking about is an extra month. So an extra month of this. It's not total lockdown. As I say, people on the beach near where I am now weren't very locked down over the bank holiday weekend. An extra month of that, surely we could survive to avoid a third wave.
What about the businesses that would maybe listening to you now, they'd be saying, no, we cannot survive another month of this. There are many businesses that are really on the breadline now.
They are, and to be honest, many businesses that are not saying they're on the breadline are very close to the brink, because many businesses are being supported by government funds, and that is the right thing to do, incidentally. But what I say to them is, it's right. If you were in government, you say, we hear what you're saying. What can we do to ameliorate? What can we do to make that better? Is there some more money we could put your way? What they won't thank you for is if we have to lock down again. I mean, if we have to lock down again in the middle of the English summer, that's the end for a lot more businesses. So, as I say, I think the government eventually came to the right methodology. It hasn't stuck to it as much as I would like them to, but the right methodology is to understand. By the way, hard lockdown, when it's a lockdown, do it. When it's not, I'm not a big fan of these tier systems. I'd like us to all come out of lockdown together, responsibly, and as well, I don't want to be in a situation, if the government says, right, lockdown is over, I don't want to be wandering around asking, is it okay if I do this? You know what I mean? We need to move to a situation once this thing is defeated of, freedom to do things. To freedom. The assumed British position is, we have the freedom to do anything that's not illegal. And I'd really want us to get back to that. Waiting an extra month to get back to it is something I would personally accept if the scientists say we have to do it.
Chris Green, you were nodding when Paul said that he wasn't a great fan of tiers. You've said in the past that I think that local lockdowns just don't work. I mean, they sound very logical. You think, well, if you've got a huge infection rate in a particular area, then throw the resources into that area to do something about it. But I know Andy Burnham said this as well, they just don't work. But is that your experience in the Northwest?
Yes. Last year, Bolton was declared the COVID capital of Britain. And yet Bolton's one of the worst places in the country now. Okay, the circumstances are slightly different, but having the local lockdown in Bolton, in Greater Manchester, hasn't solved the problem. And what you'll find, especially now, that confidence has been built up. We're looking forward to the 21st of June. Confidence is being built up. People believe they've done the right thing. You're going to get so many people going over the border. If Bolton's locked down or Greater Manchester's locked down, whatever area is locked down, people are going to think, I've done my part of this battle, and they'll be going over the border. But the idea of this rolling, not just yet, how can a business operate not just yet? There's other variants coming along. We're dealing with the Indian one. We're dealing with the Vietnamese variant. We're going to deal with the Scottish or the Morecambe variant, whatever it's going to be. We're always dealing with just another one. Businesses can't operate like that, nor can people waiting to go to hospital. And I'm very disappointed that some people would say the Tories were just thinking about money, just thinking about business. My emphasis right from the beginning to this day has been people going to see their GP and getting hospital treatment, because we know there's a disaster in cancer and it's already happening. We don't have to wait for it. It's already here.
Yeah. Okay. We'll come to
0345 6060 973.
Darren Grimes, Paul Mason, Chris Green and Caroline Flint with us. Matt in Manchester has the next question. Matt, what would you like to ask? Hi.
I'd just like to know thoughts on, I've lived in a Labour seat for 45 years, and I'd just like to know the possibilities of the outright death of the Labour Party in the coming years.
Well, that's a cheerful question. Caroline Flint, I'm sure you have views on this. Which part of Manchester, Matt, are you in?
I'm in Stalybridge and Hyde.
Right, that is Jonathan Reynolds' constituency, I think I'm right in saying. Caroline Flint.
Well, there's no doubt that the last general election delivered a very bitter defeat for Labour. I mean, it's the worst result we've had for, well, nearly, I think, was it 1935 or something like that? But a terrible defeat. And what was very important about it, and I'm sure Matt's aware of this, is the fact that we lost in seats like mine, Don Valley, 24 red wall seats. I call red wall the ones that have never been anything but Labour, but a whole number of others in Darlington and in the Northwest and in the Midlands to the Conservatives. And it wasn't that this wasn't something that the Labour Party shouldn't have foreseen. At that particular election, of course, it was a combination of both our position on Brexit, which had become more to remain and have a second referendum, but it was also Jeremy Corbyn as well. And we heard the concerns in my seat about Jeremy Corbyn in 2017, but we didn't have to fight on the flank of Brexit because at that time we were saying we would honour the result. But I think it is deeper than just that. That just created a catalyst, I think. I think it's something about the Labour Party, about how it finds a space, and it's always had to do this, between the more middle class, higher educated professional members of the Labour Party, very much dominated in our cities, a younger group of people as well, mostly again graduates in our cities, and the more traditional areas of our country, not just in Don Valley, but also in those Tory seats that we used to win. We used to win them in 97 and gradually we've lost them. And that's where there is a much more traditional working class vote. When I say working class, I'm not talking about necessarily people who don't own their own home. Many people who maybe their parents before them bought their council houses and they've gone on and done better than their parents and they own their own home. There's a higher home ownership rate in somewhere like Doncaster than there is in London. But it's much more than that. It's an attitude and a culture that doesn't feel it's listened to. And fundamentally, Labour has to find a way, Matt, to recognise that the reason why we lost in 2019 wasn't the fault of those voters who voted Tory maybe for the first time and had always been with Labour. It was a fault of the Labour Party. And we don't spend enough time in the Labour movement looking at the reasons why we lose elections, 2010, 2015, 2017, 2019. And someone said the other day, and I thought it really summed it up in many respects, we use general elections like a moral test with the electorate. And when we lose, it's almost like we blame the electorate for why they haven't voted Labour. And that's not the right way. That's not the right way to approach these things at all. And I'm afraid there's some fantastic people in the Labour Party. I'm still a Labour Party member. My husband's a Labour councillor. But there's still too many people in the Labour Party and wider on the left who every time they get up and use language about being Conservative as if it's the devil, they're also, in one way, insulting the voters who vote Tory as well. And that's not a good way to win people back. We need to go high rather than go low. And we need to come up with something that binds those people together once more, but also the policies that they can feel speak to their lives.
Paul Mason, this idea that the Labour Party often seems to give the impression, well, it's not us, it's you. If only you would understand what we're saying, then we could do well. Do you buy that, or do you think it goes a lot deeper?
Well, I'm from Lee, also in Greater Manchester. I was born, in a terraced house with an outside toilet, and I was taught not to hate working class Tories, but basically that there's a line through the community, and what Labour stands for is solidarity. It stands for sticking together to raise people's wages, to improve conditions, to gain the welfare system that we've got and we want to hopefully keep. That's what Labour stood for me when I was being brought up. And I don't think to answer the question, Matt, I don't think there's any chance that big tradition in British public life or social democracy, Labourism, is ever going to die. I think its biggest problem is well, Caroline's outlined it. There are two sets of, there is a different culture developing between towns and cities, even within those small towns that people call the Red Wall. See, campaigning in Lee, where I come from, in 2019, I had people running out of their council houses to take leaflets off me in their slippers, saying, "I'll come with you." You know, in the places around where I grew up. Who were they? There were people at work. Yeah, there were people under the age of 55 with jobs on really bad pay, and they loved actually what Corbyn was saying. I mean, whatever you think about it, Corbyn did mobilise a set of people who'd never been interested in politics before. So I'll take my chance on Labour surviving and of finding a story that brings together what is common to people in small towns, on low wages, and big cities with more multi-ethnic communities. We've all got one thing in common. We're all exploited by rich people. And the Tories are the people who represent the rich.
Caroline, you wanted to come back?
Well, I mean, one of the really astonishing outcomes of the 2019 general election is that Labour lost in every single social economic group, from the very poorest all the way through to the top. Now, you know, Paul and I have discussed this before. You know, you can understand the point that we might not get the richest people in the country, but we're not even getting the people who are, you know, rely on benefits, the people who are at work and rely on benefits, and those for whom actually they're on the average wage of maybe something like £24,000 a year. We lost in every social economic group. So, yeah, I had some people running out to give me leaflets from the very sort of estates that you're describing, Paul. But I had an awful lot of other Labour voters who were absolutely almost crying and saying, "I'm really sorry I can't vote for you, Caroline. I'm really sorry." And they were, and you know, couldn't look me in the eye.
Absolutely. I had the same experience.
That's exactly how Tory MPs felt in 97, I think. Darren Grimes, you've got an interesting perspective on this. You're from the North East. In many ways, you ought to be an archetypal Labour voter.
Oh, yes, I'm very young as well, right? I should be one of Corbyn's millennials. I should be reading Paul Mason's books with glee, but I'm not.
I'm sure you do.
No, I don't. Listen, I think, lovely though they may be, in 2017, I sort of noticed this trend really taking place when me granddad turned around and said to his late granddad, he says, "I'm going to back her." And I said, "Who are you talking about?" "I'm going to vote for her." And I'm like, "Who are you talking about?" "I'm voting for Theresa." And I honestly almost fell down dead. Now, of course, nothing happened from that election, really. Corbyn almost won it, in fact. So nothing, that sort of seismic change that we've seen over the last few years, it's continuing now, has started to really embed itself in and materialise. And it's because, and I'm not speaking about Caroline here, I happen to think Caroline was probably a fantastic constituency MP, and she certainly meant what she said when she said she would respect the outcome of the 2016 vote. I'm afraid to say, for most Labour politicians, that simply wasn't the case. And you put it really well, Iain, when you said that with Labour, it seems to be a case of, it's not me, it's you. I don't need to change. When actually a lot of people up here, you know, who would have thought that I'd be walking around County Durham feeling like I'm in the Tory Shires? But that's what we've got round here. Labour Council, Durham County Council, is no longer controlled by the Labour Party. If that isn't saying that the Labour Party is facing extinction, I don't know what will, right? So all of these things, I think, speak to the fact that for loads of voters around here, my entire family used to vote Labour. I have once, actually. I'm going to give you an exclusive, Iain. I voted Labour in 2017, but it's because I voted for Kate Hoy, who actually respected the outcome of the 2016 referendum. But I think for a lot of people around here, right, there's this idea that the Labour Party not only doesn't like its country, it actively hates it. It sneers at those who quite like the flag. It sneers at those whose values...
Sorry, that is going way over the top.
No, I'm
political
afraid to say
party hates its own country.
What's the evidence for this? What's the evidence? Or is it just another piece of disinformation from the Donald Trump-loving turning point?
I'm not involved with turning points, so I don't know where that's come from, Paul. It just shows you've got your facts right.
No, what is the evidence? What is
the evidence is that you all sneer at whenever we fly our flag.
Give us a name.
Give it Momentum. Do it all the time, sneering at the flag, and you're heavily involved with that lot, aren't you? More commie than Corbyn.
Member. What? Say again, please.
More commie than Corbyn.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
What does it mean that I spread disinformation in a Trumpian way? These things are
you just did it again.
And nonsense.
So look, give me the name of somebody in the Labour Party with authority who has in any way sneered at the flag of the United Kingdom.
Well, now with authority, look, you had the MP for Brighton, I can't remember the name of the constituency, who, when Keir Starmer had the Union Jack behind him, sneered at the fact that he was doing that. It's seen as the Labour leadership, it's seen as pandering to jingoistic tendencies through up and down the country. This is nonsense. When Robert Jenrick had the monarch behind him, there were, of course, Labour activists and all the rest of it saying that this is ridiculous. The most popular monarch in goodness only knows how long.
Hold on a minute. You are allowed in this country to be a Republican. I am a Republican.
Right, I didn't say you weren't.
No, I am a proud British citizen, but I wish this country was a republic. But that doesn't mean I'm
but most people
unpatriotic.
disagree with you, though, Paul. That's the thing.
No, but we're not talking about disagreement. We're talking about sneering. And so the point is, it's not unpatriotic of me to say I would prefer that we had an elected president rather than Her Majesty the Queen. It doesn't mean I don't stand up for the national anthem. It doesn't mean that I would in any way sneer at, calling, for example, the royal yacht after the Duke of Edinburgh. I'm in favour of all of that. But so what I'm trying to track down is you make an assertion, and it's an assertion that you throw in, and then you call us the media class. But really, the assertion has no basis in fact, does it?
What, unlike your assertion that the Tories are for the rich, when actually 14 million people voted Tory in 2019. And let me tell you, this council house that I'm in right now, that my mum bought under Margaret Thatcher's right to buy, is not the sign of someone who is for the rich or voting for a party that is for the rich. That was a ridiculous thing to say.
The party's historically represented big business in Britain.
All right.
And the Labour Party now represents middle-class activists like you, Paul.
Okay. Caroline Flint, you listen to this argument going on. What do you make of it? Because Paul has some very valid points. Darren has some valid points. Yeah. But in a sense, this is the bind that the Labour Party is in at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the thing is to the winners gain all, don't they? And we've lost, and part of our problem at the moment is defining what we're about. What is the Labour Party for? Call me old-fashioned, but if the Labour Party isn't the party that represents those working class communities, it isn't seen by those communities as that, there's a question about what the Labour Party is for. This has got more of a problem for us, but it's always been an issue, to be honest, going back to the founding of the Labour Party, I have to say, between the faiths. But what I would can I say on the flag thing, it's not that, Darren, that, the people, like Keir Starmer and others are not patriotic. I've no doubt that they are patriotic. I think where there's a problem in our party, and the Tory has problems of another nature, where a smaller number cause problems for their mainstream, is that there are some in the Labour Party who aren't as patriotic, say, as me or Keir Starmer. The problem is when Labour has to constantly justify itself on this and do these speeches every now and again. Either it's got to be in their DNA that is not just one speech or one article about it, otherwise the public don't perceive it. And that is what Labour's got to overcome on some of these issues, because there isn't that feeling often by people in the community. And I think it was made more of a problem during Jeremy Corbyn's period as leader, undoubtedly. Okay. We are in a recovery at the moment, and there's no doubt about that.
Chris Green, you've remained remarkably silent during this, mainly because I haven't come to you yet, but we are slightly running out of time. I'm imagining you're quite enjoying this argument, being a red wall seat MP yourself.
Yeah, this debate, I think, encapsulates everything that's been going on for... It's more than just the Corbyn era. I think it goes back to Ed Miliband and way before that. Labour's become an ideological project. It's too much about these extreme views that normal people do not think about day in, day out, year in, year out. And I think the flag question, I think it's key, because people are, broadly speaking, patriotic, proud, whether people support the monarchy as much as they used to, whether people will support the monarchy as much when Prince Charles is king. Well, those are slightly irrelevant points. When people are thinking about the Labour Party, that they're not proud to fly the flag of England, and the United Kingdom, and then you have a whole Labour Party conference flying the Palestinian flag. It shows where the loyalties lie, and it's an ideology.
Again, to fact check you there, it wasn't the whole Labour Party conference flying the Palestinian flag. It was some people in the hall flying the Palestinian flag.
I do think it was the majority of people, though. I do think it was the majority of people, and it was one of the proudest moments of my life as a Labour member that we actually stood up in solidarity with the Palestinian people.
Well,
it's true. We are a party that supports a two-state solution to this.
Oh no, let's not go. No, Caroline, let's not go down this rabbit hole. Thank you very much, because we're very late for the news. But we'll come back with another question for you in a moment.
On LBC.
8:38 on LBC. Darren Grimes is with us from the Reasoned podcast. Paul Mason, author of numerous. But what's your latest book, Paul? Just to give it a plug.
It's called How to Stop Fascism: History, Ideology, Resistance. Out in August. I hope that's something we all want to do, by the way.
I think it's something we can all agree on that, and I'm sure I'll be interviewing on my book club podcast about it. Chris Green is Conservative MP for Bolton West, and Caroline Flint, former Labour MP and former Cabinet Minister. Right, next question from Paul in Lancaster. Hello, Paul.
Hi, Ian and panel. So the question I'd like to ask is, do you think extending the school day by half an hour across the board is the correct strategy for catching up on any lost learning?
Darren Grimes, would an extra half an hour a day done you the power of good?
Oh, do you know what? Who knows, probably not at the minute, because I think increasingly the education system is churning out left-wing activists. So actually, Paul would probably be happy at half an hour. Of course it is. Of course it is. Of course it is.
They're voting Tory. They might be voting Tory in 30 years.
The kids aren't, I'm afraid. But look, I think we've got to, on a serious note, you've got Channel 4 News, right, reporting that more than 70% of early years teachers surveyed said that children's literacy skills have declined, and 56% noticing a drop in numeracy skills. So we've clearly got a really massive problem. The social development and educational opportunities of a whole tranche of pupils, right, are going to be really, really seriously hit. So if there's evidence that an extra half an hour is going to help get those kids and give them a fighting chance, because I tell you what, Ian, the problem for me is that it won't be Olivia and Oliver in Cambridge who are hurt by this, whose mum and dad might be able to get them some extra tuition from, I don't know, the private sector or whatever. It'll be kids in areas like this that are harmed by the fact that our schools have been closed for such a long time. And that, to me, I find that utterly heartbreaking, because you talk about levelling up, right? We can build as many railways as we want. We can do it until, I don't know, the taxpayers blue in the face. But until we actually start to level up at school, level up and convince kids that actually they do whatever they put their mind to, give them the aspiration and all the rest of it and the tools to succeed, then I'm afraid that all of this levelling up stuff becomes a little bit academic, because it really is those here and places like here, which have voted Tory, many for the first time, which are disproportionately impacted by this stuff. So anything we can do that helps kids like that, I think we absolutely should do.
Now, apart from the first bit about left-wing activists, Paul Mason, I imagine you could probably sign up to most of what Darren said there.
Well, I think there's a supply and demand issue. I've spent the week churning through surveys of young people about their experience during lockdown for a journalistic project that happens later this month. And the interesting thing there is that recurrently what they say is, I can't see a future. I'm reassessing my life. Why am I studying? Why have I done my A-levels? I'm going to go to college, be Zoom taught. It's no fun. Is it worth it? So I think the first thing I would try and say to young people is it is worth it. There will be a new normal at the other side of it. It will be a different normal, but it is worth it. The sun will still rise. And I think throwing half an hour's extra tuition at people, as Darren says, there is a class divide in education. And it's actually, again, it's what we've been talking about. It's not just Oxford versus, whatever, Darlington. It's London. London has become, the working class areas of London are now served by excellent state-run schools. So if we're going to level up, I think we should level up to that, number one. But I also think tuition is the secret sauce, isn't it, of what children who get private school education or get a lot of tuition from the private sector, it is the secret sauce that gets you those A's and AA stars and gets you into the university you want. I would like to see the government fund a big tuition drive. And of course, we've got a lot of graduates sitting out there who, with a bit of training, could probably do that tuition if paid the right rate.
That's a very interesting suggestion, actually. Chris Green, is this... It sounds very simple to put an extra half an hour on the school day as if that's going to wave some magic wand. It's not as simple as that, though, is it?
No, absolutely not. I think there's an interesting point both Paul Mason and Darren Grimes have made, and actually it connects together with something Jacob Rees-Mogg has said. If he goes to, I can't remember exactly how he phrased it, if he goes to a wealthier environment, a wealthier school, and he asks people about their expectations of the future, it's incredibly positive. I think he puts it through your expectation to own your own home. Wealthy areas or wealthier school catchments, there's that expectation of owning your own home. In poorer areas, there isn't. People don't have that positive expectation. This is one of the key things that the Levelling Up agenda needs to address, and it's a huge project to deliver upon. I think half an hour is probably fine. I think whoever did the report must have had good reason for it. But you ought not to focus too much on school and just saying more time in school is the answer. Children, I don't think would want it. I presume the reason why the school day is, broadly speaking, as long as it is because that's as long as children can pay attention and focus within the school environment. The teachers need a break. Parents would like to have their children back home. You can do a lot of learning at home, whether it's homework or other activities, and social activities are key. Children have lost a huge amount socialising with one another. That's a huge part. Clubs, societies, scouts, all those things need to get back going again. So, yeah, schools, an extra half an hour sounds like a good idea, but there's so many other things as well.
Caroline?
I think on its own, half an hour is probably pretty meaningless, to be honest. It's what you do with the day and how you're going to incorporate an extra 30 minutes. I think fundamentally, we can't have a one-size-fits-all approach, and I think everybody's touched on that in a way. I mean, I was, to be honest, astounded when I heard figures locally, but it was repeated across the country, that even where schools were open in the lockdown, for key workers and for those children from families that are most vulnerable, the attendance was terrible. It just wasn't happening. And the first thing that has to be done, and I hope it is happening in schools, because obviously kids have gone back to school already, is there needs to be an assessment of every child in that school as to where they are. Because we know that children who arrive in school from some of our poorer communities, but also where there isn't education, further education, higher education in the home, are already 18 months behind their more middle-class peers. They're running to catch up even from the age of 4. So I want to know, okay, have an extra half an hour, but what are you doing to assess how far back these kids are, how much they've got to catch up, and what's the right way to address this? And to be honest, Chris, there's lots we can learn from the private independent school sector. They have smaller class sizes. All their families have laptops and the parents know how to use them, and they've got the money to put the resources in for that individual tuition. So you said it on LBC today. I expect you to go back into Parliament after this recess and ask for more money for our schools to be used on the things that really will raise aspiration and the ability, capacity for those kids and their families to support them to be able to learn more.
If I was going to be listened to, I would have liked it to have been about 6 months ago. We shouldn't have been closing down the schools. Children aren't at risk to the coronavirus. I think all the evidence is there for that. The school environment is not where, there's minimal risk, and yet children have suffered the most out of any group in society. So I would have liked them to have listened to, but that was ages ago. So yes, we can demand all sorts of resources now, but I think it's 400 million and counting that decisions Parliament's made to put us into debt. So we can demand, we're going to be demanding for education, everything else as well. With respect,
these problems for the widening divide, the lack of social mobility was happening even before the pandemic. It was there before the pandemic. and it hasn't.
Yeah, we could go back to 2010.
The Tories have been in since 2010, right?
Okay.
We've used literacy hour. You've had over 10 years to try and get a grip of what's happening in our education system.
All right.
The gap is wide in terms of social mobility.
Let's hear from our caller, Paul. And Paul, you're a teacher yourself. What do you think about this idea of extending the school day?
Well, I think there's some really interesting points across the panel there, really. And it was encouraging in particular to hear Chris, as a Conservative MP, say that the half hour, wouldn't do it on its own. Because I just thought it was a bit of a tokenistic gesture, and there's a much deeper issue here, which sort of Caroline referred to before. I think this is kind of highlighted the sort of chasm in the education system that was already there, has been sort of bubbling under the surface. I would say, though, that it's not all doom and gloom. I think there's a sort of general narrative that all students need to catch up, and this word catch up is really quite negative for the students, because some have done quite well actually with the online learning. It sort of varies so much between schools and so much between students that we need a more sort of targeted approach, and actually trust the schools to allocate whatever funds there are there to set up what's appropriate for their community. Just adding half an hour for every school, I don't think will do much good at all.
Well, Paul, thank you very much. Just hang on, Chris, because we're running very late. I just need to tell everyone who our panel is tomorrow night on Cross Question. We have the former Cabinet Minister Rory Stewart, Jeff Norcott, the comedian, Peter Tatchell, human rights campaigner, and Nadine Batchelor-Hunt, political journalist and broadcaster. That's Cross Question tomorrow at 8. It's 8:52. Caroline Flint, Darren Grimes, Paul Mason and Chris Green still with me. Let's have a text question from Sandra in Chippenham. She says, should New Zealand trans weightlifter Laurel Hubbard be able to compete in the women's super heavyweight category at the Tokyo Olympics? Paul Mason.
Don't know the details of the case. I think trans women are women. I'm in favour of self-identification. When it comes to, I believe, Olympic authorities, or the authorities in individual sports, do set, as with the case of Caster Semenya, testosterone levels. To put it, I don't know the full scientific nomenclature for it, but they do set levels at which trans athletes have to achieve. So, without knowing anything about the specific case, I don't know. I'd like to hear the argument. This was an article in the Standard yesterday, I think, which I read, where she has undergone a full transition, but other female her competitors are arguing that she has an unfair advantage because she grew up as a man and has presumably still some of the male body strength. So I think that's kind of what it revolves around. Chris Green.
Again, I don't know the details of this, but it's a huge issue. So I wouldn't want to talk about this one specifically, but it's a huge issue. And that point about people growing up for perhaps 20 years, 30 years with advantages physically, growing up male, testosterone, whatever hormones, it does give a very significant advantage. Now, I think that's scientifically proven. I don't think that's disputed in terms of the science. And restricting shortly before a competition or for a period of time before a competition, the amount of testosterone or other hormones allowed in the body, restricting just before the competition doesn't unwind all of that experience, all of that training someone's had for so many years beforehand. So I, as a broad opinion on this, trans people go through a very difficult time making their decisions and their transitioning, and they need to be afforded a lot of respect and a lot of time and a lot of support. Similarly, the women who have been training perhaps for decades to get to these competitions, get to the Commonwealth Games and Olympics, they've got to be given respect as well, and for them to be able to train on a level playing field.
We should point out that Laurel Hubbard was not a professional weightlifter before transitioning. I don't know whether that has any impact on the argument or not. Darren Grimes.
Well, I think I refer to Caitlyn Jenner's view on this very issue, actually. Many of your listeners, Ian, will probably know Caitlyn Jenner from being a Kardashian, being once married into that family. But if you go back to 1976, Caitlin was Bruce and was a gold medalist in the Olympics, Montreal's Olympics. And she said 3 sentences. This wasn't a keynote speech, right? This wasn't some grand piece of oratory. This was some guy with a camera walking up to her and saying, Caitlin Jenner, do you believe that biological men should be able to compete in sports with biological women? And Caitlin said, this for me is about fairness, right? And I think that's crucially got to be where we all focus our efforts. People sort of working themselves silly to get to this point, to get to the elite, the creme de la creme of the Olympics, right? Working since they were kids, since they were bairns, blood, sweat and tears, going into getting them ready for the Olympics. Just to have someone who hasn't been in the weightlifting category before, just happens to be strong, which biological males are. Don't judge that based slowly off me, mind, to tell you that much. I couldn't lift anything. But the fact of the matter is that if you're a bloke, you are likely to be able to lift more than a biological woman. You have your immutable characteristics mean that you are able to do more as far as weightlifting's concerned than a biological woman.
If you have fully transitioned and your passport says female, from a fairness point of view, you ought to be able to compete as a female, surely. Legally, you are a female.
I really think we've got to be careful on all of this stuff, actually, because once you say that sex doesn't exist anymore, once you say that biological men aren't biological men, biological women aren't biological women, then you get into the realm of saying that same-sex attraction doesn't exist, being gay doesn't exist. You get into the realm of saying that sex-segregated spaces like women's refuges and changing rooms, bathrooms, all of these things shouldn't exist as well. That's where Paul Mason's thinking on all of this self-ID.
And that's one of the points on this, is it's that self-declaration. You don't have to transition. You don't have to go through that process.
No, but that in the general area, you are right on that. But this specific area doesn't apply here. Caroline Flint.
No, it's not the same as self-identification. Look, I think I think it does depend on different sports. There clearly are some sports where, for example, show jumping, where men and women are compete against each other. But there are clearly some issues around the difference between, defining our gender and being defined by our biological sex. And from what I understand, and I don't know this particular case, but there have been other cases that have been discussed before, is that even where a man transitions to become a woman, and I will accept transsexuals are women, but there are women who are born biologically women, and there are women who become women as a result of that change. But what you can't take away, and we started the programme talking about science, is the science of biology and what that means. And that is about testosterone, our hormones, but it's also about muscle development as well. And that's why it's quite right that the sporting bodies, whether it's the Olympics or any others, look at each of these cases and measure up what is actually fair in this instance. Okay. If you had a young lad in the Manchester under-16s who transitioned to be a woman, he would beat every other woman footballer probably in terms of getting into the Manchester United team and women's team. And that's just part of the biology of all this. And I just hope we can have more of a debate that is one where we can discuss these issues. Fine. It's not about being anti-trans rights, but it's about sharing a discussion about everybody's rights in this that is fair.
Right, quick final text from Shirley and Whitney. Oxfordshire are set to ban smoking outdoors as it becomes the first smoke-free county in England. Which irritating habit would you ban? Darren Grimes.
Oh, which irritating habit would I ban? I can't say lockdowns, can I? An irritating habit. Gosh, put us on the spot now. I guess slapping your knees and saying, the British people not being able to actually just put things across like we have right now, right, in a very forthright way, beating around the bush, that really annoys me. Just be direct, follow me, Geordies, and just say it as it is.
Caroline.
Goodness me, as the former public health minister who banned smoking in enclosed public spaces, I was once the sort of nanny in charge of all this sort of stuff. I don't know, it's difficult. I was going to say, I find littering really, really frustrating. I go on and do litter picks in the community, and I do not understand how people can just walk somewhere to dump rubbish when they're so easy to put it in a bin. So, I know that isn't allowed anyway, but I wish we could just, through our schools or whatever, just get people away from that particular habit, because it just seems so destructive on their own communities.
Paul Mason.
I'm not really in favour of banning irritating habits. There's things that could rightly be banned. There's fascist hate speech. But I think let's deal with the irritating habits in a way that assumes people can do things that are not illegal until otherwise outlawed. I think the lockdown. See, I do. I'm a big supporter of lockdown. I was a strong advocate of it, but on the proviso that it's an exception. It's a state of exception. What I don't want to see is the lockdown mentality sort of edge its way into everyday British life, because that would be a huge mistake.
And I'd like to ban, being inspired by Caroline, I'd like to ban gesture politics. Rather than having people ban things and putting signs up all over the place to ban things, I'd like a bit more enforcement for it.
I would like to ban panellists on programmes like this that start every answer with the word "so." That's what I would like to ban. None of you have been guilty of that tonight.
That's everybody under the age of 35, I'm afraid.
Oh, controversial.
I'm very guilty of saying my husband.
You are.
No, I'm terrible. I know. I try and ban myself from doing it.
Well, thank you very much to all four of you for being with us tonight. That's Darren Grimes, Paul Mason, Chris Green and Caroline Flint. Tomorrow on Cross Question, it's Rory Stewart, Jeff Norcott, Peter Tatchell and Nadine Batchelor-Hunt. Do join us for that. Coming up in a moment, we're going to be talking about whether June the 21st is going to take place, if you see what I mean. In the meantime, though, it's 3 minutes.